Good afternoon. Welcome back to the B&H Event Space. You are tuned into part two of The Secrets to Great Light, hosted by Sony with Sigmon Taylor here. I will remind everybody, if you do have any questions, feel free to get them in. If you're watching on the B&H Event Space website, there's a little tab below the embedded player that is for the YouTube chat. You can ask your questions right in there. Or if you are watching us directly on YouTube, just drop your question right into the comments section. And I would like to welcome back Monica and Michael. How's it going, guys? Long time no see.
Did you miss us?
I missed you. It was too short. We should have just kept it going.
I
Maybe
feel
done
like
like
I feel like I look decidedly more tired than I did 2 hours ago when we started.
You're used to only doing one a day. Now
Woo.
you guys see why we have to give Danny and Fred behind the scenes a huge round of applause
Like
for the people who make it happen.
real. Like my eyes are dry, and yeah, like you guys are champions.
Michael, you might have to, nudge her a couple times over this next hour.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah.
but she'll nudge back.
that's true.
Well, that's my cue. I think I'm going to get nudged out of here. I'll remind everybody, if you do have questions, get them in. We had some that were lingering from part one. And if you did miss part one, we'll drop the link to that so you can catch up. But part two, The Secrets to Great Light, starting now. Monica and Michael, take it away.
All righty. Thanks, Derek. Okay, so let's go to share screen. I always get paranoid that I'm going to share my desktop by mistake, which is quite the mess. Let's see. Can everybody see our Instagram?
Good to go.
Okay, thank you. So I popped this up here because in case you guys have questions or you want to see more of the work that we're talking about today, the best way to get a hold of us is my Instagram at the top. The middle Instagram is the studio, and the last Instagram is Michael's, which he never checks or posts on, but maybe if you guys encourage him, he would
Let me write mine down.
he would start posting more if you guys encouraged him, maybe. So anyway, there it is. Take a screenshot of that, give us a follow, let us know any questions that you have. We'll be happy to try and help. So round one, great foundational principles.
A little more conceptual.
And now we're going to talk about how those translate to actual doing, right? So, okay.
83.
Do what?
Go to 83.
Go to 83, skip this one, skip
Yeah.
this one, skip this one.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So do you want to then explain this?
Yeah. It's going to be hopefully interesting for you this hour because
As opposed to last hour?
yeah, or any of the previous hours that we've talked over the last couple of decades, is that Monica and I, obviously, we photograph very differently from each other, and I've always said that she is a little bit more like a classical musician. She likes to have a score a little bit. She likes to pre-plan just a little bit, know what path she's going down. And I'm more like a jazz musician. It's like, okay, I'll show up, and that's when I start thinking about what we're doing, and kind of bring those elements together. So no matter how you approach your music or your photography, hopefully some of these principles will work well for you. We really like the idea of creating a wall of light. And
So do you want, I'm sorry, do you want this slide or this?
yeah, no,
This one?
keep going. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
And we're going to talk a little bit more about that wall of light, but in particular, we're looking for areas out. We're going to be talking about outdoor portraits now for just a little bit. When we go outdoors, we're looking for an open sky. We're looking for directional light. We're looking areas where there's maybe overhangs by a porch or tree branches or buildings or things like that, that creates a wall of light for us. It's almost like we're looking for a big North Light window studio, but it's outdoors.
Right.
Okay. So foundationally, we're looking for a spot where the lighting on the people is wonderful. Okay. It's either the lighting is wonderful or we're able to kind of easily manipulate that lighting at that spot so that the people look good. And that's a whole different paradigm than probably 95% of photographers use. Mostly photographers will pick a spot because the background looks great, and then they just put people in front of it and go, and they're just hoping
Right.
that everything looks great and the people look great or whatever. So we're looking for people first, background secondly. And that surprises a lot of people because the background and the environment and is so prominent and is used, I think, a lot in many of the portraits that we do. People probably think, hey, we're looking for that spot first. But it's always about looking for the light first on the people or being able to manipulate that. Okay. We're looking at reflected light. We're looking at a lot of different areas to make the people look good. So on the next slide, again, we're looking for an open sky with an there's a lot of different.
Sorry. You snuck in one of your transitions, and so now I can't.
So we've talked about this. We're looking for an open sky. Go ahead and just keep clicking. It'll just fill up the slide. We're looking for open sky with an overhang. We're looking for good color temperature, a consistent color temperature on the faces. Okay. By that, we mean like one color temperature. We don't want a mix of color temperature on the skin tones so that it will muddy up the water, so to speak. It's really okay to have a lot of different color temperatures in the background. It could be edge light, it could be background light, it could be some kind of light that's lighting up some scene in the background. But that color temperature, we want one color temperature of light on the face. All right. And then we look for areas where there's an edge of light because we like to create dimensionality in our image. So we look for hair light, so to speak. We look for edge light. We look for background light. So we're looking for areas where there's a transition from shadow to sun. It's like when sun is shining through the trees behind a person. So we're looking that way. And we look to use energy. It's really interesting that the energy could be right next to the person, or that energy could be that splotch of sun that's 30 yards away, but we can angle that reflector and bounce that light back to the people. So we're looking for energy to be able to manipulate it. So we can either use light that's bounced. I can offer a reflector. Sometimes we can use the sun and put a translucent between the sun and the people to create a dimensional light. And sometimes, very rarely, we'll use a strobe outdoors to make a place look great. So as we go on here, here's an area where there was open sky and backlighting and a reflector off to the right so that we were being able to bounce that energy back to the people. We're using the vegetation and the docks and everything to create some dimensionality. On the next one, it's just an open sky at the end of the day where we have that golden hour, and when that open sky and the sun is giving us dimensionality so that the lighting looks great on the people and it's giving us a richness in colors everywhere. Again, this is towards the end of the day. The light is filtering through the trees. There's a softness to the light. There's harsh shadows of harsh sun going through the leaves to destroy the lighting on his face. There's one color temperature on his face. There's dimensionality, and we're using the environment to create dimensionality also. Here's where we're using a reflector. We're finding energy off to the right-hand side and able to bounce that light off that, usually a white reflector when it's as sunny as this time of day is, okay, to bounce light back into the eyes. Now, if you look in the eyes are so important. The eyes of this young gentleman, is vibrant, it's vivid. You can see the highlights in the eyes, and it's a very nice natural scene. We're looking at open sky, end of the day, on the river, clouds are coming in. It's softening up that direct sunlight, so we get dimensionality, highlight and shadow on the faces. So we're just all different types of areas where we can be able to direct that energy, find places to make these outdoor portraits work.
So we're still looking for directional lighting. We're still thinking of portrait lighting on the face when we're outdoors. So Your cough is.
Sorry. Sorry.
So we, again, don't want flat lighting. We don't want just the light source to be behind us. We want it to be to the side. And then as we do that, then we need to find where it can be from the side and also where the background can fall into place exposure wise and make sense. So that's what we're trying to do. So you should see some, unevenness of the light. You should see light on one side and shadow on the other so that we can get that directional shape of the face. And
So-
so explain what you're talking about working on the edge of the light with either like, because I know where these were shot. So I know this is, there's an overhang over.
Okay,
yeah.
I can show you in about 4 slides
Okay.
where that edge is. But
Okay.
here, for example, there's an overhang, open sky, there's a soft light, reflector on the ground to kick a little bit of light back up into the faces, to bring some light back up in the eyes and to soften the faces and add some life. Open barn. There's a barn door, the light's coming through, that's giving us directional light.
And it was to the side of him. It wasn't behind us. He was on the side of the
And if
barn.
you'll notice, all these areas of directional light is coming from the side. It's
Mhm.
not coming directly into the people.
Mhm.
So the door light, the window light, whatever is coming from the side, where we're reflecting light from a patch of sun, that reflector is coming from the side. It's not
Mhm.
coming directly from the camera position.
Okay, so now we're gonna go, that we were talking about this a little bit at the end of the part 1. And so we really love this kind of backlighting, more interactive posing. And we usually include this in all of our sessions, at least 1 or 2 images of this in our traditional portrait sessions, and everybody loves it. There's just a really beautiful quality about it, a really nice feeling. And but we can also employ this when lighting is tricky. Maybe it's the end of the session and the light has come behind the trees and we don't have great lighting on their faces anymore. So then we can do something where they're looking at each other.
So if you go back a slide, when you were asking just a few minutes ago about when we want to get on the edge of light and shadow, this is exactly a situation. If you look at their feet, you have the sun bouncing off the ground back there. There's a greater amount of energy there. There's more shade in front of them. And you know, what's really interesting is most of these portraits people love because there's a sense of naturalness in these portraits. You know, photographers will complain, people don't like portraits where they don't look back to the camera. Well, you know, they will like them if there's a rhythm to it, there's a sense of naturalness to it, there's a real moment, you know, and it's about gently directing people. Look, mom and dad, look at each other, you know, getting some energy, using your voice, using your body to create some energy in these scenes. Very similar lighting through all these. Open sky behind them, light behind them, usually a reflector on the ground in front that's kicking in a little bit of light to fill in the shadow
Not
areas.
quite on the ground, but at an angle, because
At
I
a-
was holding it.
Yeah,
I
at an angle.
That was a good question in part 1. I want to make sure we're clear on that.
At an angle. When it's flat, we're not getting the angles of incidence with angle of reflection.
Mhm.
So we're always working angles with our lighting.
That's one of my favorites too. So just the story is not the straightforward portrait. The story is how those 2 little girls are looking up at their grandfather. So so this is just a really nice technique that we use quite often. And like I said, usually at least 1 portrait from the session. It's usually one of the last ones, and just gives us that opportunity to show them something a little different.
And it's visually beautiful,
Mhm.
generally. You know, visually it's beautiful and it's a nice captured moment. You know, it's something people don't usually cannot get themselves, you know?
Well, and you know, this always seems to be the extra portrait. You know, they come to us for that straightforward establishing portrait. They fall in love with that. We do what we're hired to do. But then it always seems that this portrait ends up finding a wall for its own also, because these are more of kind of an art piece that happen to be the family. You know, you kind of have to look at it a couple times and go, oh yeah, that's us, or that's you guys.
You know, and it's something people haven't really imagined.
Mhm.
You know, it's hard for them to visualize this thing when they say, hey, let's get a family portrait done. It's the right time.
Mhm.
So we love using reflected light because it opens up the rest of the day for us to photograph.
Mhm.
Being in a city environment, even at noon, where one side of the street is full sun, that side of the street is acting as a huge light source for the other side of the street.
Mhm.
You know, it's like I lived in Los Angeles for 30 years, and all the motion picture people all over everywhere in television, people filming, you know, they would use, you know, big, huge light sources, and they were actually covering up beautiful light that was
Mhm.
bouncing off the building. So we love to look for reflected light. It's a beautiful light source. And generally, when you have reflected light, like this light is being bounced off fences off on the right-hand side, it's giving her hair light and edge light and giving a lot of beautiful
But the
dimensionality.
reflected light isn't giving her hair light.
No, but this direct sun.
Right. The sun is behind her. That's what we love at the end of the day, is that kind of glow and that warmth, but the reflected light is lighting her face.
Right.
Mhm.
So, yeah. So all of these are just different examples where people would probably consider this not being exactly the right time of day. It certainly isn't that golden hour, but you know, it's bouncing off buildings, it's bouncing off walls, bouncing off fences, and really giving us a beautiful light source. This is bouncing off a fence, beautiful hair light.
So I think this is a good example to just make sure that people see that the fence that this is, the way her face, I can't get my mouse over there, the way her face is being lit up is actually that little tiny sliver of fence by her right shoulder, so
Yeah.
camera left. So
Crazy, right?
that's actually, because you can tell that because the light is behind her. We know the light's behind her because we can see the edge light on her hair. So we know that that light, the same light that's hitting her hair, is hitting that fence. So if she had closed that fence and was standing in front of the fence, it wouldn't have it, we wouldn't have any light on her face. So by opening up that fence and having her take a step back, we're having the light from the fence actually reflect on her face, which is pretty
And it's
cool.
pretty because that whole fence is acting as a big source.
Mhm,
You know,
mhm.
it's just interesting. You know, and it works even at different times of day. This is towards the end of the day, light bouncing off the house. But we also, if you go to 112, just click on that. There's a quick little video. We photographed this bird hunt or dove hunt
my
or
God.
something. You know, it was like Gardens and Guns on steroids. And they wanted a group picture of everybody that's out there.
It's like
So
welcome to the
same,
South.
so same principle. It was at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, something like that. So sun behind them, putting trees behind him that would bring down the tonality back there. And then the sun bouncing off the dirt and the buildings behind us lit up this whole group.
And we had planned on doing this like in the field where it was green at the end of the day. Like we had a whole plan,
Mhm.
and then nothing went according to plan. So we were lucky that we had that big dirt road or whatever,
Mhm.
just like we were talking about on the last hour about that portrait I did in Florida with all the sheets on the ground. So just some energy kind of bouncing back up in.
Yeah, you're not going to teach how to find a dirt road and this is where you're going to do a portrait.
Right.
But when you learn the principles and then apply it to your situation, it gives you a lot of freedom.
Okay, so we've talked about building a wall of light, and just to make sure that everybody understands that wall of light, we're trying to simulate like a big north light window, which is that pretty soft light that wraps around. And we're trying to either find that outdoors, or we can use a reflected source to make that wall of light. And so there are a rare occasion where we have to use a strobe outdoors.
Right.
So, so we mentioned that we do that very, very rarely, and it comes down to if somebody needs something at a particular time of day in a certain location.
Because 99% of the time, we're able to pick the location.
Right,
We're going to be in a general area, but we can pick the location because of the lighting.
right.
That's going to look good on the people.
So I think another thing I should say that we do differently than everybody else is when we are using a strobe outdoors, we use it bare bulb. We don't use any modifiers. We're not putting an umbrella on it. We're not putting a softbox on it. And people freak out when we start teaching this. But
Yeah, we should give a prize for the first person that actually believes us
yeah,
and starts doing this, because
right.
no one believes us. And the reason we don't use a modifier outside is we don't want the wind to blow it over. We don't want to carry sandbags. We don't want to have a wagon that we're carrying gear on. You know, we want to, our gear is the camera and the reflector in general.
Yeah.
So we want to connect with the people. We do not use modifiers outdoors. And these portraits look beautiful. So the formula for that is to find an area of.
So sorry, I just want to say the formula, if you want it to look natural, like we talked last hour about if we want it to look powerful and fashiony, that's not this formula. This formula is if you don't want it to look like we lit it.
Yeah, and we have that formula coming up. But this is for it to look natural, look like it was lit with natural lighting. It doesn't. So it will not look like it was lit with a strobe. So we find an area of soft, even light. We make a meter reading with a light meter, okay? And then we adjust the strobe so that the power of the strobe is going to be 1/2 stop under the ambient light reading. So, and then the exposure setting on the camera is going to be for the ambient reading. So the next portrait, for example, is not going to win awards or anything. Family was in for a couple of hours at this beautiful hotel down in Colonial Williamsburg. It was dark. It was rainy. There was lightning. The family was going to be leaving in about an hour to go back to Florida. There was nothing we could do. They wanted it outdoors. They were dressed casually. Bare bulb strobe, 1/2 stop under the ambient, and that's what we got. Okay, so it cleans up the face, gives a little bit of directional light, and it makes everyone look great, which is the most important thing.
That diagram is just a little misleading because it looks like the bare bulb is right over
Yeah, it
your
needs
shoulder.
to be over to the left a little.
and it's aimed across them, not at them. So just want to make sure we're clear on that. Again, very typical of our family portrait sessions. This was the hottest day in the Northern Hemisphere.
Yeah, I think it was 140 degrees or something.
So brutal.
Our tripod melted and I had to call B&H for another
It
one.
was terrible. It was so bad. So, but you know, and not an ideal lighting situation because it was really under a lot of tree cover, but this is a very special place for them. This is where they wanted it. So, so this is an instance where we did use bare bulb just to give some exposure on their faces.
Yeah, it was actually, you know, we're using a little bit more of a fill light, actually, to tell you the truth. You can directional light, you can see from the sun in the top right, you can see the rim light on all the faces. But again, beautiful connection, keeping the connection with the families, getting them directed. Now the dog is even looking in the correct direction. So this was outside our country club. We photographed a member of the month. It was very flat lighting right here. So bare bulb strobe again off to the right-hand side. And I put a speed light with a dome inside the car to get the edge light off on the right-hand side of his face. Family portrait towards in the backyard. It was a little bit cloudy, wasn't great lighting coming through there, but just by bringing the bare bulb strobe over on the left-hand side, we're getting beautiful direction, and we're not compromising anybody, you know, which is the important thing. When you do family portraits, you make mom look great. That's the most important thing. But here, we're not compromising anybody. We're not compromising dad. We're not compromising the son. Bring the flowers in there to get dimensionality in the portrait. We were on a farm out in Surrey, across the river. Kind of a beautiful little scene on the family farm. It almost made me feel like going into a cathedral. I know it sounds kind of silly with all these trees lined up, but it was beautiful dimension to it. The lighting was fair. It wasn't great, but again, bare bulb strobe off to the left-hand side to create dimensionality, half stop under the ambient, and this is our portrait.
And before we show the portrait, you're not aiming that strobe right at them. Like
Hi,
angle
you know,
wise, yeah.
yeah, one little secret, that's really a good point. If you put it how you would put a strobe conventionally, like in the studio.
With a softbox.
You know, you're not doing that. The reason is, if you did that, it would light up the ground in front of them.
Mhm.
So I'm feathering it up so that the brunt of that power isn't hitting the ground in front of the family.
That's still one of my favorite portraits. And again, this road was very sentimental to them. This is, I think, their third generation in their family, this farm is. And so they wanted that sofa and they wanted that road. And we were able to handle that with just knowing kind of our lighting principles. Same thing with this situation. This family wanted, that's not the right portrait. That's not the cropped portrait. Anyway, close enough. Sorry. So they wanted to be on this boat and it was at a certain time and we can't change the direction of the sun and we can't park the boat on the marina. Like we can't build a marina on the opposite side of the yacht club. So this is a bare bulb strobe, just cleaning up the lighting on their faces. That is on our Instagram if you want to see that closer up and see the lighting on their faces. And then for this one, she did turn the boat and we got all of the grandchildren, cloud 9 for 9 grandchildren. And that's a bare bulb also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
And we can go to the fire thing.
Okay.
So kind of in a different line, you know, when we do commercial work, a lot of times we need to be at a specific location, just like the last couple of examples with the families. So here's some examples where we're at a certain location and we need to add lighting and we're actually making the key light noticeable.
So maybe we can answer this question too at the same time. So the examples we just showed were to make the lighting look not obvious. And so that formula, I'm just going to go back and pull that up. So you're going to take an ambient reading first. So say that family is sitting out on the sofa and the ambient light reading there is F8. And then you're going to put in your bare bulb strobe and you're going to meter that. And you want that exposure of the strobe by itself to be a half stop under F8.
So it's going to be 5, 6.5.
Right, which is really kind of 7.1. Your camera's going in thirds, like.
Yeah. So what you have to do to make that work is you have to set your light meter to like 1,000th of a second or something like that. So it's not reading the ambient and then you're just reading the power of the strobe.
Right.
So it's going to be a half stop under whatever the ambient is, be it F8.5, whatever it is.
Let's keep for the purpose of the example, we'll keep it at F8.
Okay.
And then you're going to ratchet your shutter speed on your light meter up to 1,000th of a second so that we're not registering the ambient light. Now we're just going to measure the strobe. And we want to get that strobe putting power out to 5, 6.5, which on a light meter is going to be about 7.1.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're going to set the camera at F8.
Yeah, so we had someone ask about this.
Right.
So it's not, we're not reading it for 9.5. That's adding, that's a half stop over.
Correct.
We want a half stop under.
Right. And so again, that was using the example of we don't want the light to be noticeable. Now, if you're shooting high fashion or some of Michael's commercial work, we want the lighting to be almost a subject in and of itself. It's a very big part of these portraits. So now the formula will be different. So
yeah, the formula here is, again, we're going to start with reading the ambient and we're going to put the strobe at a half stop or more over the top of the ambient reading.
but your camera setting is still at F8.
No, it's going to be at.
This is why he does the commercial.
It's going to be at the half stop over then.
Oh, how long have we been together?
Quite a while.
Yeah, long enough that I should have known that.
But
Okay.
you don't do the ambient commercial.
I don't do the commercial work.
Yeah.
Thank goodness.
Down Colonial Williamsburg, Williamsburg PD. Same thing, bare bulb strobe, open
Oops, sorry.
sky.
Okay. Let's see. Here we go.
Volunteer fire department, this is amazing to me. There's no light modifier. There's one bare bulb strobe, and it's lighting all these guys. Speed lights, 3 speed lights behind each of the 3 groups. Okay. And a speed light in the tanker truck on the left-hand side, and then doing the portrait. No modifier. This is beautiful sunset up off the lake, and then taking a bare bulb strobe to act as my fill light, because I'm lighting very gently the side of the boat where it says fire and rescue.
And most people would just take that exposure without strobe and then, select it in Lightroom and,
Yeah, I don't know how to do
exposure.
I don't know how to do any of that.
Right.
So
So we're back to the paper towels on the strobe again.
Pretty
You have to
much.
figure it out because you don't do really any post work. So
none of this is posed.
yeah. All right.
So real quick, same kind of concept. Sterling out in front of the movie theaters near our studio here. Great personality. We actually used an umbrella for this. I don't know why in the world I did that.
I think
And then
it was
we-
at the beginning.
Yeah, and then we dropped the sky in because it was pretty gray. So you can just flip through these real quick.
So same principle on all, we're not going to show that, maybe we don't have time. Same principle on all of these portraits. And this is where we do want the strobe to show up. We want
This will be part of the personality of the portrait, actually.
correct. And so they were actually being lit by the sun, but the quality of light wasn't great on their faces.
Yeah, I
so
wanted
you
a
just
little
needed to clean it up a little bit.
Right. I wanted a bare bulb strobe, so I used a bare bulb strobe off the right and took it farther down, so it was really more of a wraparound type of rim light almost to them. And same thing with the next picture. The sun was setting, but it wasn't really clean and directional on some of the faces. So one bare bulb strobe to the right-hand side, almost to the water, to light up these folks, and then putting a speed light behind the front of the truck, the middle of the truck, and the back of the second engine there to create a balance visually and create a balanced visual weight. So this was done in 50-mile-an-hour winds. Thankfully, the dog didn't bite me while I was barking to get its ears up. So
same concepts here. So we're going to keep
just
moving.
flipping through it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
All righty. So
this wall of light concept, it's really just taking that idea of the north light window and bringing it actually in. We're taking the concept of studio work, north light window, into any kind of window that we use. So, we're all familiar with using a window and using for our lighting for a portrait, but I've seen so many times that people will just put people next to a window, and that's not the only thing you need to do. You need to use the right part of the window.
right, because oftentimes people put somebody in the middle of a window or the middle of a softbox. And so that's really effectively cutting your light source in half. And this is kind of a hard concept to understand. Hopefully we'll be able to explain it, but you're explaining that imagine the wall of light again, and really the first part of it is that key light, that main light. And then you can imagine the back half of that as the fill light. So that's why we put the fill light on the same side as the main light, because we're emulating that big wall of light, that big north window. If you put a subject right in the middle of the window or right in the middle of the softbox, you're effectively cutting that light source in half and you've lost all of your fill light. So
all, you've folks that stayed with us through the couple hours here, we've shown quite a variety of different portraits in different situations, but it's all the kind of the same concept. So, it's really, it's funny. It's kind of easy, But then having, the hard thing is having to make the little adjustments
Right,
as you go
right.
through. And that takes experience, that takes you building a visual library in your head. That's taking you going out and just spending
studying,
time
yeah.
and photographing.
And if you walk through museum and you look at the old masters and you look at these beautiful painted portraits, that's where this is filtering down from. None of those portraits, those classic portraits, are lit from the front or cross. I mean, they're moody. There's directional lighting on a lot of those, and so that's what the painters were trying to emulate. And that's what we try and do as portrait photographers. This portrait would not have worked if that table was further forward. In fact, I think it was further forward and you moved it back to the back side of that window so that the light would wrap around his face. If he was further forward, it would have become split lighting. So that's an important concept to
And then it
understand.
wouldn't reach into the eyes, and there's different things like that. So that's why at the very beginning, we said, we want dimensional light, we want directional light, we want lights that's going into the eyes, things like
And
that.
quality of light. Yeah.
Quality of light.
Yeah. So this is just a window light too. And the windows over, I can't use my mouse, but the window's over on the camera right, obviously. But it's this young gentleman is on the back side of the window. Same thing here, just big open.
All same concepts with
Mhm.
radically different locations, but making that same concept work.
Mhm.
Drake and his son, again, you can see the window. The window is part of the image, but it's putting everybody towards the back side of that window, not right to the edge of that window, but even farther back so that you're using that whole light source.
So this is our studio, and those are the front doors with which we've created our window light portraits, our gilded portraits that we showed some in the last slideshow. So it's not a big window whatsoever, and it's really not ideally placed. I think it faces west pretty much because the sun is going down over there. So it's really not ideal whatsoever. But we can manipulate it and make it work. And that's some of those portraits that we showed in the last slideshow. So again, we're looking at that door as split in half between key and fill light. So I'm going to just show this as her right in the middle of the door. So where the door jambs meet is where she's standing right now. And it's okay. But if we look at her right eye, we can see that it's not as bright as it could be. And simply by moving her to the back of the two doors, we can really see the difference that makes in that portrait.
And the right-hand side is with the reflector underneath.
So it's wrapped around and we've added a little reflector, and that makes all of the difference. I don't think I'm going to show that movie simply
No need
because
to.
we're
But if we just go to that right there, so many times we'll bring a V flat over onto the shadow side of our subject, so it's really bouncing a lot of light in there. A lot of times also the back wall gets a little bit darker than we like, so I'll do a little strobe with a $5 dome from Amazon back there that will light up the wall, give it a little bit of energy back there, but it gives a little hair light. And so we can get this, and that shows a lighting diagram. And so that's at the beginning. That picture right there on the left-hand side is using half the door, really, no reflectors, nothing else. And on the right-hand side up there is what we really strive to give our clients when we're using the window lights.
So what we've been talking about today is when we don't have a real window and we don't have a real, wall of beautiful north light windows, then that's what we need to, as professionals, create or emulate. Again, for the style of portrait that we're creating. So we've got different options. We can use soft boxes as I use the biggest octabox that anybody can make. I use it for one person. I use it for 10 people. I just love that big source of light, and I can feather it and direct it depending on the size of the group. If you don't have that, you can certainly use 2 umbrellas, 2 small light sources to create the wall of light. And then you can also, on this third example, these are 3 separate examples here. You can always bounce light into something as long as the color is correct. And that can emulate a big north light window as well.
Yeah, so if you go down to Mr. Withers there, those were 2 strobes bounced into the wall on the left-hand side. This is Ernest Withers, one of the great giants of American photography, had a studio in Memphis. A third strobe was behind him on the left to light the room behind him. Okay. The next portrait.
And so just to explain to people, there wasn't a window in that room. And but you didn't want to not use that room. I mean, it's just, this is his whole story. And so you didn't want to sacrifice the location. So that's where knowing how to make lighting work is really important, because if somebody didn't know how to do that, then they might be like, okay, let's go outside and do your portrait. And it would have been a beautiful portrait, but it wouldn't have told the story that it was capable of telling.
Yeah, and we were actually in this room, the doorway and the wall next to us on the left-hand side was right next to my shoulder. So there really wasn't an option of putting umbrellas or light modifiers in that space. People would have just said, well, we can't use this space. But I knew we could use the space by using the wall as the modifier. Here we use the wall on the right-hand side to photograph these 2 firemen to create an artificial wall of light. It's nighttime, using strobes to light up the engines and the ambulance. Using the wall on the left-hand side over here with 2 strobes to create a big wall of light, a third light on the right-hand side to give that edge light and keep kind of a high-key feeling to all these portraits.
Can I skip down to here?
Yeah, just real quickly. Yeah, sure.
So, but wait, we're moving into, sorry,
Squash lighting.
splash lighting. Here we go. Sorry. Okay.
A lot of times, I really like the idea of squash lighting. Filmmakers call this 180-degree lighting. It adds glamour, it can add depth, and it adds light balance. So what you're doing is, if we go to the next slide, you're getting your key light or main light on one side, and then on the opposite side, we're adding an edge light or hair light or glamour light, whatever you want to call it. So a lot of times I really like the concept of visual weight, because that could mean anything. It could be lighting, it could be color, it could be texture, whatever, so that we're able to add balance and texture into a portrait. So I use this a lot, be it on location here, in the studio, in the black and white next. These are the only ones that have transitions. You should be happy. Outdoors, where we have a reflector and the hair light, we do that a lot. We like the dimensionality there. Again, we have the sun coming through the fencing and bring a reflector on the right-hand side so that we have the main light, and that hair light is the squash light. So it's just a nice little concept to incorporate into a lot of the portraits that you do. I love to layer with lighting. We'll show you this real quick. I do this all the time.
So this is just with
the key light and fill light.
Mhm.
And then we turn the lamps on and drag the shutter so that we could get that ambiance from the existing lamps in there. And then adding 2 background lights that were bare bulb into the wall behind the family to create that dimensionality and to add warmth and to pick up some of the color that's in that room.
So we started here just
Yeah.
with one light, and then we turned on the lights
on the lamps.
on the lamps, and then we separated them from the background.
Right. And the key here was to add 2 background lights.
Mhm,
It gave a rhythm to it. It was like the whole solution.
mhm, mhm. Okay, let's go down to here. This is from, this was actually, we showed this in your roadwork series, which we recorded a few weeks ago. So, so people should definitely go take a look at that if they haven't watched it, because there's a lot more lighting, or not different lighting, but reiteration of these principles in that
Yeah, if you
program.
go just on that one right there, and just play that video, just a few seconds, it'll show the room.
Oh, you found it?
We're doing photograph of Paul here.
And I don't know that they can hear sound, because I don't think I muted video in here.
Paul's
that
got
basically
this
is
sentence.
the room.
Okay. Anything in the world will.
And so in that tiny little room, you were able to create this.
Yeah, just using a light modifier, that Raja 42-inch light modifier. And the real key, I mean, one of the things you really need to listen to about in these 2 hours is the real key to our lighting when we use strobes is that we don't use the flat flash head. It's not a speed light. We use a domed flash head so that the light will spread out. It is dramatically different in the quality of the light. So you want to use a dome light, put it into a light modifier with the strobe pointed out through the translucent. And it's just, sorry, it is just a huge difference in the quality of the lighting for people.
So we're running short on time. We might have to add a part 3 to this series because there is a lot that we haven't gotten to, but I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because we've been talking a lot about angles. So I want to make sure that people understand that concept. So we've been talking about where to put the reflector when we're working with lighting, how to know where to do that. So you have explained this, but I want you to kind of just go over it again, make sure that everybody understands what you're trying to accomplish here.
Okay, this is part of a concept we call splash lighting. And splash lighting is to add exposure in the low end areas of an image where there needs to be some detail and things like that. So when you really start to hone your craft and start to learn lighting, the thing that you're really going to delve into is that the importance of angles. Okay. So there's a concept of angle of incidence is equal to angle of reflection, which means the direction that the light is going to bounce off the surface at an equal angle that it hits that surface. So in the first part here, it's hitting at a 45-degree angle. It's bouncing back off that surface basically at a 45-degree angle. Now, 100% of the light doesn't do that. A core of the light, a core of that energy does that, but it's an important concept to know. So for example, if you were in a scene where you just had a speed light on a camera, that light is going to obviously hit that wall, hit that mirror, hit that glass, and come right back to the people. 90% of that energy or whatever it is. So this concept works really well. If you go to the slide just before the diagram, we're in a portrait session here. Want to do a little interactive portrait of this lady and her new Cocker Spaniel puppy. There's some beautiful window light coming through there, but I want to show part of this room. I don't want to put a reflector up there to open up the shadow areas of her face. So by bouncing light off the ceiling, I know that I won't get reflection in all those little panes of glass. I'll see the reflection, so to speak, if I laid on the floor. So by bouncing light off the ceiling, I'm bringing up some energy. I'm filling in the shadow areas just a little bit, and it's opening up the shadow areas and really makes it for a beautiful portrait. But that's by understanding angle of incident equals angle of reflection. And this works when you need to learn how to bounce lights off walls. This works when you're using your softbox to feather off people's faces. This works by understanding window light better. You know, it's just a really strong basic concept that you need to, piece of knowledge that you need to incorporate when you're learning about lighting.
So I'm going to skip ahead again and
We have hundreds of slides.
because Michael overdoes it. So I think we can I think we can sum up here. So let's just talk about this real quick. And then we'll wrap up with a couple of portraits that we've made specifically with this idea, with these ideas.
Great. Oh, you want me to talk about it? I thought you were going to.
It's your keynote,
Okay. So,
but
If you
really
ever get-
quickly
if
because
you-
it's 3:53.
okay.
Okay.
If you are in a situation, maybe you're newer, maybe you don't have a lot of experience, you're lost. You don't know what to do. You need to kind of keep it together. Well, go back to the basics. Go back to what's simple. You're having a hard time with your strobes. You're at someone's home. Get the family over by a window.
Mhm.
Use window lighting. Just keep it simple. Take away all the variables, take away all the gear, get it back to the basics and dive in there. Don't try to use too much gear. Even though we're Elinchrom ambassadors and we love the gear, don't try to use too much. Also, don't dwell and make it everything perfect. Painters like Gainsborough, Sargent, they left things undone. They left buttons undone. They left cufflinks, cuffs a little bit at an angle because they kept life in it. So,
Yeah,
And-
I think we're our own worst enemies sometimes, and we're too much in our heads. And I always say, if you're in your head and you're thinking about your gear and you're panicking, then that means you're not thinking about who? The person in front of you. And your job is to serve them and serve them well. And so you can't think of yourself and them at the same time. So it's so important to know your gear, use gear that you believe in, which is why we use Sony. It's why we use Elinchrom, because that's two less variables that we have to think about when we're shooting. We know that's going to work. We know that we're good there. So then we can really focus on the people in front of us. So, and Michael's right. If it gets tricky, if you're getting stuck, just take a second, take a beat and go back to basics. So this is very, very much indicative of our portrait work. This is the same family that was on the boat. This was their portrait a few years earlier. We do not photograph weddings, but a friend of ours,
it's about looking. So,
daughter had weddings and had a wedding, and so we were guests and we ended up helping, and it was this big room, and so knowing where to put them, it was a bunch of windows on the other side, and we had to know that we could put them there. We didn't have our lighting with us, and so this was all window light, and then being able to do something like this. So really trying to figure out problems, figuring out how to make a scene work for us. We wanted to use the stairwell. It's terrible lighting on their face, so we make it interactive and have them look at each other, change it to black and white. And then at the top of that landing, we had this window. And so we were able to create that. So again, just kind of always thinking about where the light is and how we can be using it to our subject's advantage. Michael has mentioned our Black Label portrait work. And so if you follow us on Instagram, you've seen it, but this is a line of portraits that we do here at the studio. It's done with one big octabox. Oftentimes I'm using a black V flat on the other side because I want it to be dramatic. And I want it to be a very definitive pattern of highlight to shadow. I want that fall off to be pretty obvious. Gilded is the next line that I've been working on. This is window light, but it's it's not subsidized, what's the word I'm trying to use? Enhanced with a constant light, just to clean up the lighting on the face, because you guys saw the door that we're working with, and it's not perfect light at different times of the day. So by knowing how to use a constant light and just kind of kissing that in there just ever so slightly, it cleans up the light on their face. And it's the same concept if I had had a strobe. I was just using constant light. So just very low power. I don't want it to compete with what we're using, but just to rather enhance it. And then using that same door with really manipulating how much of the light from that door coming through. So we put up a translucent, but then by flagging it off, we get a much more dramatic look from here to here. So just changing things like that. And then again, if you haven't already watched Michael's series on road work, you can see all of these portraits that he's been creating all over the country that are kind of just a masterclass in all of the things that we've been talking about today, and using light in different situations and flattering subjects and working with spaces that might be unexpected and creating really interesting portraits in places that you're not scouting these places ahead of time. You know, you're walking in for the first time and seeing them and having to create work that celebrates who you're photographing and the art that they are making, and using all of those techniques. Sometimes it's been window light, sometimes it's been bare bulb bouncing into walls. So you've had quite a lot of different things happening. So to sum up everything that this 2-part series has been about, our goals are to flatter people. We want the lighting to match between the subject and the background. Typically, we want that energy in their eyes. We want those expressions to really pop off of the files, pop off of the prints. But when push comes to shove, emotion is always the most important thing. Expression is always, always the most important thing. So get that expression first, and then you can tweak it if you need to with lighting. Emotional connection is everything that our work is about, whether it's a family or just an individual portrait. We want that connection between the subject and the viewer. So hopefully we've shown some principles today that will enable folks to go make their own, go build their own style, take some of these foundations and build some of their own work, and not be intimidated by lighting.
Yeah, you need to, everyone needs to really find their path, and realize that there's people that are going to influence you. There's mentors, there's heroes, whatever it is, but you don't want to copy them.
Mhm.
One of the massive heroes of mine is Arnold Newman, and has a huge part of my brain, but I still don't want to just copy him. So you got to find your own path. And we're just trying to show you some tools that you can use.
So we just had 2 questions that we haven't handled yet, so I thought we would answer them real quick before we sign off. One was from actually back in part 1, so thank you for being patient. And they are just asking where you're aiming. I think they mean like, where are you pointing the fill light if it's on the same side as the key light?
So it's pointed to the subject, or pointing to the people. And the thing that drives me a little batty is that there's quite a few photographers that will keep a fill light up high, especially if they have a cam room and the fill light is permanently placed in the camera
On the
room.
ceiling, yeah, from the
Yeah.
ceiling. Mhm.
So I've always felt that the fill light should be fairly non-directional. And by keeping it up high, you're making it a directional light. So I want it to be in between the key light and the camera, and I want the fill light in general to be at the height of your subject. Now, I understand you have families sometimes, so you just need to average that out. But if you have a 3-year-old, you need to bring the fill light down to the height of his head or her head.
In relationship to the key light, if you're building just a big wall of light, they should be the same height.
No, not
Relatively.
necessarily. They will be close to it
Okay.
because that key light's bigger generally, but still you don't want that double direction of light to
Right.
be kind of messing with it a little bit.
So oftentimes we'll have our key light just a slight angle down to our clients. And then if we're using the fill, it would be more straight on, not at an angle.
Right.
So hopefully that answers that question. And then Louise had a question. Please elaborate on the angle chosen for the feathering of the bare bulb up. Is this the height? Is the height about the same as the tallest person and then aimed like 20 degrees over their heads? Can we be more specific? So in that portrait that we did of the whole family on the green sofa, we talked about aiming that bare bulb up so we don't illuminate the whole ground. So is there a rule of thumb so that people know how to angle, like how high to angle that?
I haven't had one. I'll take a picture and look and see if the ground's too bright, and I'll just feather it up.
Yeah.
And usually that's all I need.
Because we're not really running in danger of it not getting into their eyes unless you're just
Right,
going
because
straight
we're
up.
still using a dome, so you're getting the bottom side of that strobe to
Right.
light them. So
It wouldn't work with the flathead.
Yeah, get rid of the
Just-
flat head. Yeah, but I would just say, don't make it too hard.
Right.
Take one shot, do that, and see how it looks.
Okay.
It's just a thing to keep thinking about.
So I think unless some other questions have come in, then I think we've answered everybody's questions. We probably need a part 3.
But
We
Derek,
have
Derek's lighting looks good. man.
Derek's lighting looks good.
How's my lighting? Is it all right?
It's
Yeah,
good. It's good.
really nice.
We had about 100 slides that we didn't get through. Michael tends to go overboard when I allow him to build the keynotes. He spent about 2 days working on a 2-hour program, but that's okay. There was nothing else.
Michael,
that
just
needed to be
send
done
just
at
send
this
me the
video,
slides
so-
she left out. I'll read them.
Okay. That'd be so much easier.
Exactly.
I got you. You guys, wonderful, wonderful series. Thank you both again. I was just gonna stay off. I'm like, I didn't want to interfere.
No, I just figured you went to the bathroom or something. I was like, well, we'll just take questions.
I'm over here taking notes. Over here.
Where did Derek go?
You're a pro at this now, Monica. You should know. I might just leave you on to, you can sign us off. You probably would do it better than I would.
No, I will not do it better than you. But we would like to say thank you to Sony because, again, we would never be able to not only do these programs, but most importantly, create the work that we're creating if we had not switched to Sony. So, and in case you missed it, I just feel it's really important for people to understand we switched to Sony long before we had a professional relationship with them. So that Black Label line of portraits that we showed you would not exist had we not switched to Sony because the system that we had been with for 23 years could not handle details in the shadows in those portraits because they're so dark. And lighting it with one light, and they're in dark clothing, and we're using black V flats, and there was no information in the files with our previous system. So I almost gave up on that portrait line altogether. So if it hadn't been for Sony and being able to see all the detail in the files and get great prints from them, we wouldn't have that. But and then of course, we have so much to thank B&H for because you guys continue to invest in our industry. And that's something that especially the last few years, many vendors have not been able to continue to do. And when other vendors have pulled back and scaled back, you guys have doubled down. And so we just appreciate you guys continuing to offer all of this free education to so many people. So thanks for having us again.
And it's so nice for B&H to be like the top tourist destination when you visit New York City. I mean, I got off at Penn Station and got out of the exit, and I'm like looking around like this, and the guy goes, "You looking for B&H?" I mean, just immediately came up to me and said that.
We had a friend that was up in the city last weekend, and he sent us a picture from B&H because he knows he's like, we made it to B&H. It's like Mecca. So
Yeah.
we strongly recommend.
Yeah.
Michael texted me like a teenager. He's like, I'm here. Look, sent a picture. I'm like,
The conveyor belt.
yeah, he was so excited. So
Yeah.
excited. Well, a huge thank you to you guys, because without you guys, we'd be in the shadows.
Oh.
I'm a father. I can make dad jokes. That totally sidetracked me. Thank you guys. A wealth of information. It honestly is always great having you guys on. You bring the just years and years of experience, good vibes.
He called us old.
He called you old.
He called me old.
I'm right there. We're peers. We're in this together.
You and I are peers.
Yeah. And this boy has some speed. If you're following him on social media, it's like, oh my God. he
Oh
must
my
have
God. Social,
first
yeah,
base.
the social media conversation. We're gonna have to do a social media for the older generation. We'll do like a roundtable discussion one day.
And
It'll
you know
be
what?
fun.
Maybe we can do it with a practical exercise of getting Michael's Instagram set up.
There we go. We have a goal in mind. All
Yeah.
right, we're gonna get Michael's Instagram going for everybody out there. Go follow Michael on Instagram.
Exactly. Yes.
Bother
Just
him.
get ready.
Tell him-
Get
yeah.
ready. Start messaging him. Yeah. All the things.
I'll be his brand manager. I'll take over. I got you. Social
Nice.
media manager. I could fit that role in.
Perfect.
Nice.
All right. First order of business, Danny's picks. It'll be Michael's picks. But huge thank you to Monica, Michael, all of our viewers out there, and of course, Sony for really believing in our education, what we do here. Free education at the event space. We do it better than anyone else, don't we?
That's right.
Yes. Monica's like, is he
You're
still on?
Yeah, he's nodding.
That is it. Another edition of the V&H event space now in the books. Catch y'all next time.